Hello, insiders, and welcome to this new episode of the EU Bubble Insider. Today, our guest is Jan Willem Gourdriaan, the Secretary General of EPSU. Jan Willem, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Likewise, Christophe. Happy to talk to you and tell your listeners a little bit about the work we do.
So let us begin maybe by explaining to our listeners what EPSU is and what is the role of EPSU within the European Union.
Thank you, Christophe, and thank you for taking the time to do this interview. And a pleasure for me to try to inform your listeners about the work we do in EPSU. EPSU is the European Federation of Public Service Trade Unions. We are an organization with over 260 trade unions affiliated across all of the European Union countries, but also in the Balkans, so almost all candidate countries. Countries like Iceland, Norway, the UK, Turkey, as well as in countries like the Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Georgia, and even Central Asian states like Kazakhstan. We represent nearly 10 million workers, and that would make us one of the largest European trade union federations and also one of the largest European membership-based organizations. In EPSU, we are not just broad geographically, but also in terms of our sectors. We have four broad sectors. The largest in terms of our membership, I would say, is with regard to health and social services. That's the sector in which healthcare assistants, nurses, doctors, paramedical staff, emergency workers, child carers, people who do elderly care or care for the disabled work. The second sector would be local and regional government. That's the people who work in town halls, but also firefighters, people who work in municipal services like parks, libraries, musea, municipal police. Central government is our third sector. That's people who work in social security, ministries, prison staff, customs, border guards, and so on. And the fourth sector would be what we would call the utilities. That's wastewater and drinking water services, electricity, gas, waste management services. And in all these sectors, we work with employers who are public, non-profit, private, and that last also includes then also multinational companies. Now, you asked what is it that we do. In a very basic form, we are an organization where unions come together to exchange information, best practice, but we're also more. We bring together workers and the unions to campaign and to negotiate and to try to have influence on the decisions of governments, of employers, of the European institutions, decisions that have an impact on public service workers, our families, our communities. And I often say we organize for action and change. I think it's interesting for your listeners also to know that EPSU is a recognized European social partner, which means the European Commission has an obligation to seek our opinion, and of other European trade union organizations and employers as well, of course, before it makes legislative proposals with regard to workers' rights or social policy. And it also means that if the employers and trade unions agree, and based on a mandate of our members, we can negotiate agreements that become legislation. Examples are, for example, the Part-Time Work Directive, which is there to end discrimination of part-time workers and improving their conditions. In EPSU, we also negotiated with the employers a directive on medical sharps, preventing injuries due to needle stick injuries, and this for medical staff. Sometimes our work takes the form of asking unions for information, like how the right to strike is implemented, the UK situation, where the UK government sought to implement minimum service level legislation, is an example. We try to help our UK colleagues. Um, Sometimes we campaign for the release of trade unionists in jail. At the moment, for our Belarusian trade union colleagues who are in jail, the Lukashenko regime crushed the independent trade unions in Belarus. We have attended trials for the release of Turkish unionists in jail. Our healthcare leaders of our healthcare union were in jail, and we were present at the trials and the hearings to show that the international community cares about what happens in Turkey and what happens with these trade union colleagues. More often we seek to influence European policy to improve working conditions, to prevent commercialization of public services like health and water. We bring together workers from different countries in the same company, in a European Works Council, where we also can negotiate agreements with those multinational companies, or we negotiate with European sectoral employer organizations, and that can be on issues like health and safety, continuous professional development, skills, trade union rights. So I hope, Christophe, this catches a bit the work we do, and I'm sure I will return to some of those issues, some of those topics in the course of our conversation.
So one of the things you mentioned is part-time work, and from my perspective, I see a lot discussions in different groups about the future of work, about what works, especially nowadays with all this transformation to hybrid work models, remote work models. You've been in this business for many years. I think if I'm right, you joined EPSU in '92. What is the most significant transformation that you have seen? What are the new things that you observe right now in terms of the challenges that workers have to deal with, and also from the perspective of EPSU? What has changed, and what is most important in this, you would say?
Thank you, Christophe. Yes, I've been with EPSU for quite some time, and I've seen many changes. The future of work is just one of them. Just to recall, when I started, we were in the EU 12, which then in I think 1995 became the EU 15, 2004. If I'm correct, we had the EU 25, then the EU 27. Croatia joined in 2013. We had Brexit. We have many candidate countries from the Western Balkans, and now, of course, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. So I think that has had a considerable influence on the work of EPSU, certainly in terms of the coordination between unions from so many different countries, and it also meant that we grew out of an organization where we were 3 persons plus some secondments, and then have grown to an organization with about 23 members, 23 staff members. I think that's also a recognition of the importance the unions contribute to the work we do, because it's the unions which provide the resources. EPSU is fully financed through our membership, so we don't operate the federation based on any other resources from other organizations. That doesn't mean we don't do projects or so, but the staff and the organization, it's all paid through our membership fees. So we, over that period, we also saw changes in our relationship with our global federation, PSI, Public Service International, leading in 2009 to the takeover of or the merger of the work of PSI in Russia and Central Asia. So geographically, our scope grew. So these were some of the changes I've seen over the years. I would say a big challenge in terms of coordination of our work, but also you start off by asking the question about the future under the chapter of the future of work. We used to do everything by fax and telephone. Then came email, and now since the pandemic, there's a lot of communication going through. Yeah, like we're doing this, recording this interview through online means. We do meetings online, and that is giving a change in the work we do. Certainly makes for more frequent contact with affiliates, especially if they are from far away places. On the other hand, one thing which I would say has been constant is the importance of the, how do you say, the interpersonal relationship, no, the ability to talk with each other, and therefore we still do also physical meetings where we bring together people in one way or another. I would say the hybrid meetings are maybe the biggest challenge of our work, because it quickly leads to an in crowd who's physically there and an out crowd, the people online who sometimes don't see what is going on in terms of physical discussions. In those years, I would also say there have been many firsts, as you can imagine. We had the first European Works Council with Waste Management International, a US company, a company that now has disappeared from Europe, and its subsidiaries have been split over various other companies, which, by the way, is also an example of, how should I say that, how fickle and fragile private businesses are. We've frequently seen CEOs change their stories and punchlines and where the emphasis of their business should be, and it's then workers which often suffer the consequences of those changes in strategies. It's, by the way, one of the reasons why we in EPSU understand that public services are best owned by the public hand. No, private companies, people underestimate that. No, private companies can walk away from running a service, but public authorities remain responsible for those public services. Take, for example, the care company Orpea, the French care multinational company. Early last year, in 26th of January last year, a book was published by a journalist, Mr. Castanet, called in English The Grave Diggers, which explained the profit-making system the managers of Orpea had set up, leading to pressure on workers, but also cutting corners in terms of care for the residents, for the elderly. And to such an extent that the investors walked away from this company, and the company almost went bust, and then had to be saved by public finance institutions in France. It's just one example of what the difference is between a public service and a private service. No, the public hand, the public authorities cannot walk away. We have also in EPSU seen lots of developments with regard to the social dialogue, and in a moment I'll give you a little scoop. In terms of social dialogue, where we work at European level with our employers in the electricity sector, we set up a social dialogue committee. In the gas sector, in hospitals and health, in local government and central government administrations. And just this morning we received the news from Commissioner Smith, who's responsible for jobs and social rights in the European Commission, that the European Commission had agreed to set up a social services social dialogue committee, and that's the first time in, I think, 10 years that a new social dialogue committee has been set up. And this particular social services social dialogue committee covers more than 9 million workers in the European Union. So that is great news for us. Overall, all those social dialogue committees we're involved in cover many tens of millions of workers, so they're quite important, and a quite important part of our work. Another important... Yes, sorry.
Sorry, why would you say is the social dialogue an efficient tool for the advocacy work you do?
I wouldn't maybe say it's an efficient tool, but it can be an effective tool. You can imagine if with the employers you agree to a joint position, and both sides are in agreement, that is an important view to be taken into account by the European Commission or the European Parliament or the Council, the member states, for that matter. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is the social dialogue committees at European level allow the employers and the trade unions at European level to actually negotiate an agreement, which would then apply to their members, and even to ask for that agreement to become what I would call generally binding. With other words, it becomes a piece of EU legislation. The part-time work directive we just referred to is one, but we also EPSU negotiated a sectoral agreement with the hospital organization, HOSPIM, around medical sharps, trying to prevent injuries for people who work in hospitals, so that they don't cut themselves or injure themselves through needles. So that agreement applies in the whole of the European Union, and that obviously contributes to safer working environment for workers there. So those sort of negotiations are an effective and efficient tool, because they are actually leading to European legislation much quicker, as often in the European Parliament, with all the positioning for political reasons which sometimes takes place around the file. Here the employers and unions, if they agree of course, can find themselves. Interesting, I think, for your listeners is maybe that at this right moment, today, the employers and the trade unions at the intersectoral level, so that's for all of us, are negotiating around digitalization, and which will include the right to disconnect. So at the end of the day, we will know where we are with those negotiations if we continue, and the outcome of that might well be a European agreement which becomes legislation and then applies to all workers. We have done the same in central government administrations, so that's the people who work, let's say, in the civil service, where with our employees we reached also an agreement on digitalization, and we have asked the European Commission to put that into legislation. And now the Commission is waiting for what happens at the intersectoral level, and then to see how these two agreements can be articulated with each other. So that is an effective instrument. But I must also say, not all of those social dialogue committees and in not all the sectors work well. It depends, how do you say it? It takes two to tango, as they say. And if employers do not want to make progress, then nothing in those social dialogue committees happens. Another example for which might be interesting for your listeners is the what we call transnational negotiations with a multinational company, where with the unions in the same company but from different countries, we try to reach agreements in the company. Most often these are about health and safety, improving equality, diversity, ensuring there's a diverse that there's a policy to ensure inclusive workplaces. They are about skills and so on, and sometimes they are about how the company wants to implement a share program for its workers, so which is in a way also real money. So there are many of those negotiations federations like EPSU would be involved in. Now, the social dialogue is not always how should I formulate it? A rosy story. Christoph, you might be aware that EPSU initiated the first court case of a European Trade Union Federation against the European Commission in 2018 because of the arbitrary nature of a European Commission decision which affected an agreement we had reached with the employers in central government administration about information and consultation rights in the case of restructuring. The European Commission didn't think our agreement was worthy for European legislation for the sector and refused to implement our agreement, and we brought that to the European Court of Justice. We lost that case, also in appeal. So that's not a happy story for us.
But what did you learn from losing?
I'm just going to say that although there were a couple of things which were confirmed by the court. First of all, that European Trade Union Federation can use the court for this sort of thing. The court did confirm the autonomy of the social partners. It also said that the Commission had been sloppy in the way they handled our file, had not behaved correctly. But over the most principled issue, if the Commission had limits over its discretion as regards social partner agreements, we lost. Meaning the Commission hardly does have any limits to its discretion, and it can judge social partner agreements, and then it can use social, economic or political reasons to reject bringing an agreement forward to the Council. And basically, as you know, if you talk about politics, that can also be how the feathers on your head bend with the wind in a given day. So that was a less rosy story of the social dialogue. There are also achievements which you cannot see. Let me mention two. One is that the water services in the European Union have not been liberalized. The electricity or the gas market, as you know, these sectors have been liberalized and leading to the consequences the Commission and the Council are now, and the Parliament are now trying to deal with. But in terms of water services, that liberalization did not take place. Your listeners might remember Bolkestein, Commissioner Bolkestein, well known from the Services Directive. Well, before the Services Directive, he wanted to liberalize Europe's water services, and we prevented that from happening. And the same is true for health services, where former Commissioner Andriukaitis, in an interview, said that he aspired to an internal market for health, much like in the electricity sector, and also that we prevented, which is quite relevant still today, because in the discussions around the European health data space, which should make it easier for you and me and for the listeners if they are getting an accident or get ill in another country, for the doctors to exchange information in a secure way. The European Commission has tried to also introduce the opening up of this European health data space for healthcare, um, by making it possible to have the commercialization of data. At least that's how we read the proposals of the European Commission, and with several governments, also members in the European Parliament, we're trying to prevent that from happening. So these are some of the battles we fight, Christoph.
And in fighting those battles, who do you form alliances with? Who's your natural or not natural surprise partner in in those battles you fight on the EU level?
I would say that varies. Of course, first of all, we try to work with others in the trade union movement, other European trade union federations, with the ETUC, sometimes with the global federations. Just to give you a recent example, we have been very active together with our colleagues from the construction industry with regard to improving the legislation with regard to the exposure of workers to asbestos. Now, most people will understand in the construction industry, in the construction sector, workers can be exposed to asbestos, but think of workers in our domain like firefighters or waste workers. Also, they are exposed to asbestos, the particles which can get free and which cause cancer, and still many other workers are exposed to what we call passive exposure. So first and foremost, of course, we work with other trade union organizations. Another file where we work with the whole trade union movement is around procurement. We are campaigning to ensure that public funds which go to corporations to when they win a public contract, that money doesn't go to companies which violate workers' rights, which do not have a collective agreement. But we also work with many other organizations. EPSU has been involved in the network for sustainable procurement, where we not only look at workers' interests but also at the environment, at taxation, because it's likely that a company that violates workers' rights will often also not pay its fair share of taxation, tries to avoid paying its taxation, or has violations of the environment. So we've been working with organizations like that. For example, you asked for concrete examples. Friends of the Earth. We do much work together. We have worked with Friends of the Earth and many others to get the European Union and member states to withdraw from the European Energy Treaty. We have worked with them on the right to energy coalition, ensuring that people do not get disconnected from their electricity. We've been supportive of Fridays for Futures, so we've worked a lot with them. We also find each other in other campaigns like the European Water Movement, in the campaign Reclaiming Water, or another campaign is around Our Future is Public. We have also worked with Corporate Europe Observatory. They are doing work to expose corporate lobbying and ensure that the institutions are transparent and accountable. Together we set up Alter EU to enforce more transparent rules for lobbying the Commission, lobbying also the European Parliament, a campaign which has been quite successful and quite necessary also. Well, you remember more recently Qatargate, where even governments seek to influence the European Parliament. So, Christophe, we are working with many different organizations, depend a bit on the subject, of course. When we work in the healthcare sector, we work more with organizations who have a primary interest in health issues. Recently, we worked with the digital rights campaigners to ensure that the European Union invests in public digital infrastructure to protect us that our data can only be stored in cloud services of mega companies like Amazon Web Services and that sort of thing. So we campaign with in EPSU with quite a lot of organizations. Basically, that is because I think you could say that we in EPSU understand that our struggle is part of a broader struggle for progress. Trade unions are part of a human rights agenda. That makes that we also stand together with the women's movement when they fight for abortion rights. We stand with the LGBT plus community when members of that community are attacked. But you can also think of workplace democracy, where we want to have more influence on the workplace and not have a boss dictate and bosses around. And that, of course, is part of the democratization of the struggle of our democratization of our societies. And all of us have this, I think, shared sense of social justice, trying to improve the situation for people and for our communities.
So how do you know when that progress has been made, and how do you know, how do you define progress from this perspective?
Well, on certain issues it's quite simple, of course. If you prevent certain things from happening, like around the many of the digital files, digital legislation, which is being discussed right now when companies are trying to protect their interests at the expense of the interest of the public, often the interest of journalists and others who want to report about these companies, and these companies try to prevent that even in legislation. So when we prevent that, we have measures of success when we improve legislation for workers' rights like health and safety. The example I gave of asbestos, that is almost of course an immediate and measurable success when certain proposals go off the table. A well-known example is the campaign to prevent this multilateral agreement on trade in services, TISA. That's off the table, and that's the work of many organizations who objected to this vision some had of trade in services, or very limited control over the trade in services. So these are very measurable successes. Other successes are maybe more difficult to measure, or lead to a longer process. For example, we have argued with the European Disability Forum and with AIDS, which is an organization for the standing for the interest of the elderly, to get an inquiry in the European Parliament on how the elderly were treated in the European Union during the pandemic. We wanted a specific inquiry to look at how the elderly were treated in the different member states and what the lessons could be we could learn from that. That we didn't get, but we did get the so-called COVI committee in the European Parliament, and it is these weeks that the Parliament will decide on its report with a remit which was a lot broader than what we asked for, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It just looks at more aspects than we initially had asked for. So that is, I think, also a success, although in a different form. And of course, when we reach agreements with employers, that is also a directly measurable success.
So when you look at the member state level, workers' rights are very different if you consider north, south of Europe, east, west. How do you navigate that? Because I would assume that the differences are huge.
Yes and no. It's a question I get often asked, also when there are groups, trade union members, visiting our office, and they ask. They more or less ask the same question, because when we explain what a European trade union movement is, then we explain that not only are we from many different countries, but we're also from many different trade
Sectors.
union sectors, but also many different trade union traditions. No, we have unions who find their origins in the socialist or the social democratic trade unions, in the Christian or Christian social trade union movement, who are more professional orientated trade unions, or even come from the communist trade union tradition. So we are from those many different perspectives and traditions, and from many different countries, and that, as you say very rightly, means also different labor histories, different labor struggles, different industrial relation systems, etc. So yes, it can be difficult. On the other hand, no. It has been surprising, also from my experience, that on many files we know what we want. No, we are a movement of workers' rights, of progress, trying to improve the situation for our communities, and that's why in our work I would say human rights perspective is so important. No, we're all human beings with human rights. We're not different people in different countries who have no connection with each other. We're all workers, people with rights which we try to improve and protect. And these rights we try to improve and protect. So I think there is a realization among the unions that at European level, some of the differences we also have between countries or within countries disappear. If you want, maybe that's our enemy, if you want, is or our adversary is clearer at European level. So the noses are in the same direction, and it does. I mean, it's a bit plastic if you want. It doesn't mean that somebody doesn't sneeze in a different way as somebody else, or has a cough, and with other words, we sometimes have difficulties. But in general, the noses are in the same direction, and we understand also that also those who have better situations in terms of protection of rights, that together we have to work to bring everybody up, to level everybody up. And when we negotiate, to make it concrete, when we negotiate with employers, for example, we try to include a non-regression clause. With other words, we try to protect the situation in countries which already have better standards, so that an agreement is not used by an employer to bring workers in those countries down. And I think a condition for trying to do that is trying to be comprehensive, trying to be representative, trying as an organization, which is important to me as General Secretary, trying to be as an organization to be inclusive and democratic, so that everybody has the possibility to express his or her position, and that we can discuss and talk about those issues, no, and trying to understand one another.
And in this ever-changing world, you spoke a lot about digitalization. What do you think will be the issues, the most important issues for you and for EPSU in the upcoming foreseeable future? Will it be AI, work time, maybe something else?
I think these will be important issues. I would say there are at the moment a lot of our work is overshadowed by the war in the Ukraine, and its implications for security, peace, democracy. It is a preoccupation for many of us. As I was saying, EPSU has members in the Ukraine, so we hear the stories of our colleagues there. But that war has also consequences further on. Just briefly, don't want to bore your listeners with my analysis. They can find other analysis which probably are more detailed. But for us, the solution to the future of Europe cannot be the militarization of our continent. No, I mean, what is happening there, that cannot go on. But we can also not deny the Ukrainian workers and people fighting for their independence, we cannot deny the fear of others for Russian, imperialism. No, and I think for the future, democracy and social justice will need to be part of the solution to get out of this conflict. But that conflict has an immediate consequence for many workers, and that's of course the cost of living crisis. And the high inflation we saw last year continuing this year. And as a consequence, we have seen many strikes across Europe, many protests across Europe to convince employers and governments to pay workers a higher wage. And I must say, for many of my colleagues, many trade unions, these campaigns have been quite successful. In the wake of that, there have been also attacks again on the right to protest, the right to strike. So that is quite a concern, which links with one I have as well, which is about the rise of the extreme right. But I'll come back to that. We also foresee, and that's especially important for public service workers, a return to austerity or coordinated austerity, where the European Commission again seeks to put pressure on public budgets and public finance, and that will have impacts on public services very broadly. It can be in health, can be in care, can be local authorities, central government administrations, where there will be pressure on wages, pressure on working places, cuts, privatization, and all what you have. So I would certainly say that is a preoccupation of many of my colleagues. Part of the austerity agenda, as we would call it, part of the austerity agenda is also to try to commercialize public services. So continuation of privatization, public-private partnerships, etc., especially in health and care. I gave you the example of the European health data space earlier. And then I think climate change is a challenge, but I think that's a challenge for all of us, including for public service workers, how we adapt, how we um, improve. The future of work we already touched upon, digitalization. As you heard, as trade unions we try to, and that applies also to the use of artificial intelligence, we try to make agreements and regulation to ensure that workers have a say how digital technologies, how artificial intelligence is used on their workplace, no? So that they have a say in how these technologies affect them. It's very difficult to predict how artificial intelligence will impact our work in the future. Take our conversation. They could easily record something with artificial intelligence, record a conversation like this, and when you post this online, there might be a bot for one of these mega companies which captures our conversation and turns it into how trade unionists think about things, which I never pretend to represent all trade unionists, but I mean you can see the point there. So how that is going to affect our daily lives is difficult to predict, but what we try to do is to ensure that these technologies are introduced based on assessment, what it means at the workplace, how it affects workers, how we can regulate that, how it doesn't replace the human in control principle. You wouldn't want a robot to determine how your elderly people are treated in an elderly care home. You want a human being to give directions, etc. That doesn't mean to say that artificial intelligence, digital technology, robotica cannot be a tool which can help. No. So the future of work certainly will be something which will occupy us in the future. How that's going to link with another issue you raised, working time and working time reduction is moving up, I would say, on the trade union agenda. There are many unions who campaign for a reduction in working time at the moment, even a 4-day working week or a 6-day working week. And we will also have a discussion in EPSU, because there are many different perspectives on this. This is not so easy to have a single European trade union position on, but it's exactly one of the topics where we need to discuss and work with each other to understand how we can improve the situation.
But I can imagine if we have the possibility to shift into a 4-day working week, remain the same efficiency of the work thanks to the technology. This is something that any trade union would applaud, right?
Well, it all depends on the way in which it is, of course, introduced. No, I mean, employers probably also don't have a problem going to a 4-day working week if that, for example, would go together with a reduction in salaries. No, and that is not something we want. So it all needs to be part of negotiated solutions. We would resist employers imposing their view on their workers, on the workers in their administration, their company, etc. So it means you need to discuss and negotiate those issues. But I refer to climate change. You could also argue it's beneficial for many, also to address psychosocial risks, to reduce working time, to reduce work, home work, travel. So there can be many benefits of it, but certainly we would not want to see it go together with a reduction in wages or pensions, etc. I mean, that means also you're asking of people whose job might already be precarious or whose job might already be low paid to even reduce their salary. That will not happen.
Jan Willem, I would like to finish our interview with a more personal question. If you could reflect on what is the most rewarding thing about this work you do as the Secretary General of EPSU?
I think that is to be working in such a broad environment with so many people from so many different backgrounds, many different cultures also. I find you learn a lot from each other, and your listeners might have noticed my accent, or maybe not even my accent, but I'm from the Netherlands, so you have a distinct perspective coming from a particular country, but you're influenced by how others see things through their experience, and I think that is a great rewarding experience as a person. The mighty thing, the thing which sticks, is the possibility from day to day to try to help to improve the situation for workers, to try to make society better for all of us. No, not just for the few, those who have a lot of money and who can profit from that, but to make it better for all of us. I think that is to be able to work in the trade union movement and a movement towards progress. I think that is something mighty and very rewarding, I find.
Sounds absolutely like something that can be rewarding.
It is. It is.
So thank you very much for giving us your time today, for sharing so many interesting insights and also real practical advice how this work that you do at EPSU gets done. This was a very interesting conversation, Jan Willem.
Thank you, Christophe, and I hope your listeners will enjoy it and take the time to listen to our conversation.
Absolutely.
All the best to everybody.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.